Hello, my name is Rick Houston, and welcome to the Scene Vault Podcast, your source for all things NASCAR history. Presented by Las Vegas Motor Speedway, America's racing showplace. What was the snake's name?
I don't know.
Please tell me.
I don't know. I don't care because I was petrified of this thing.
You didn't care enough to ask.
No. 18 years old. Wondering what the hell am I doing getting ready to jump out in front of one of these 80-mile-an-hour cars coming down pit road. Never had to do this before. I was scared to death. I couldn't plan a home life because we didn't know what time we were going home. He'd work all night long. I wasn't for that. I was 18, 19 years old.
The day NASCAR and all of us associated in any way with NASCAR forget its past, that's the day we don't have any future.
Well, Shawn, first things first, you're from upstate New York. What part?
Canandaigua, New York. It's roughly an hour northwest of Watkins Glen.
Okay. Canandaigua.
Yep. Canandaigua. That's a mouthful. Upstate New York.
Yeah.
Western part of New York State.
Well, you know, I've got an odd first name, so when anybody asks me to pronounce my first name, I always say Rick. So how did you get into racing?
So my family was always involved with sponsorship of a dirt modified, big block modifieds in upstate New York area. And got involved with a gentleman named Danny Johnson. Had many nicknames, the Doctor, the Danimal, so on and so forth. And they just became sponsors of him locally. And it was kind of a traveling series, so to speak, that went to Ohio, Canada, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. And in my summer times, I'd jump on board with him and just go to all these dirt races and learn, kind of really just as a fan, not so much getting involved because I was 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. But I would go and sneak in the trailer because I wasn't old enough to get in the pits. So they had to hide me in the cars or in the trailer in between tires. And we'd go and I'd just kind of hang out until I got involved where I was starting to change gears or help with motor swaps or working on the car. And so that's kind of where I started out with getting into the racing industry.
So how did you wind up moving south?
So a gentleman named Bob Lutz.
Okay.
Bob was living in North Carolina and working for Andy Hillenberg at Fast Track Driving School.
Really?
Bob's stepfather was Glenn Donnelly, who was a big promoter in the upstate New York area with the dirt modifieds.
Yeah.
So Bob had moved to North Carolina a while before I did, and I just got in touch with him and said, hey, I'm getting ready to graduate high school, and I want to come to NASCAR. And I was thinking of this story last night, trying to, relive some of how it went. This was in 92, early part of 1992. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, we had pay phones, but I didn't have a pocket full of quarters to go and call him.
Yeah.
And this was during school, and I would go to the library and kind of talk to the librarian and kind of sneak to the back and try to use her phone during break to call Bob and try to, communicate with him because it was either that or I had to wait till I got home from school and do it afterwards. But I had study hall period. I was in the library, and I would go to the library and get the big newspaper sticks. You know how we used to have these sticks and the newspapers were wrapped around them?
Yeah.
And I would pull the sports section and get the box scores to see what the race results from the Winston Cup races were the day before. And so they had the papers in the library, so I'd kind of see where it is. But I would call Bob and be like, hey, I want to come down and, can you help me get a job? And, it's kind of looking any source I could because I didn't know what I was getting into. And he said, well, you need to come down and visit me. So early March, spring break for us in New York, I
Early March 92?
92.
Okay.
And I headed to North Carolina. And I went down there.
By yourself?
By myself. I met with Bob, stayed with Bob. Bob was also living with Jeff Gordon at the time. Jeff was an up-and-comer.
Yeah.
Andy Graves, who was at Hendrick Motorsports at the time, and Bob were all roommates. So that's where I stayed while I came down there. And basically, he just took me around, took me under his arm, and we went to a couple shops, went to a couple different places, and he ended up having an interview for me with Randy Dorton at Hendrick Motorsports in the engine shop. I wasn't really into engines, but it was my foot in the door. Again, I didn't know that the 24 team was about to start in 6 to 8 months. I was just looking to get my foot in the door. When I did leave, I was a little disappointed in myself that I only had one interview that I went to, although I kind of met with a lot of people. So when I went back home, here we are with the phone calls again. I can't call from my cell phone or text, Randy Dorton and asking about my job because it was just an interview and they had to decide what they wanted to do. So I was in the library. Hey, can I use your phone? I need to make a phone call. Eventually, she was catching on to what was going on, and I was using long-distance phone calls calling from New York to North Carolina. Back then, the rates were probably pretty high to make long-distance calls, and a school budget was probably like, why do we have such a huge phone bill, from up in the library? But that's all I had.
Yeah.
And because I just didn't have the time after school, I was playing sports. In my senior year, I had to, I just didn't have time to go home and make phone calls to try to, finalize everything. Finally, about the middle of April, they decided that they were going to hire me, and they needed somebody in tearing down engines and cleaning up parts. Not really what I was looking forward to do, but I was willing to do whatever it took to get my foot in the door. So I graduated in June of 1992, and by the end of that month, I was living in North Carolina, starting to work at Hendrick Motorsports in the engine shop.
That's just not fair because 99% of the people that I talk to for this show, they start out with Buddy Arrington, Jimmy Means. They start out with Elmo Langley. You started out with Hendrick Motorsports, man.
What was cool about Hendrick Motorsports was Randy Dorton, obviously.
Yeah.
Jeff Andrews, and all the engine builders that were they were building for Darrell Waltrip at the time. One of my longtime heroes growing up was Darrell. Here we are working for the engine shop that's building his engines. This was before Darrell decided to take it on and build his own engines. Hendrick was building his engines. But having the support and the team that Hendrick had back then was phenomenal. But my first project, and this I still don't know how it was related, because I'm thinking NASCAR, racing, cars, whatever, but I was working on Rick Hendrick's boat. He had a project that it was a catamaran boat that had dual 454 big block aluminum engines. That was my first project. I was just involved with working on boats but I didn't care. I was just glad to be there. And it was a short-term project when that was going on. But I was down in the hall of the engine and putting these engines in and work, as they were building these boats for Rick. And knowing now that Rick was big into boating, because, again, I didn't really know all that, but they were building this boat and they wanted the engines from the engine shop to be in there for Rick. And that's how it all started. And but I was in tear down and cleanup, and that's where I started. And I worked there for about almost 6-7 months before the 24 team was about to start up and become a team. It was in the process, but the pit crew side is what I was. When I caught wind that they were looking for a pit crew, that's when I got involved with that. And I went down and tried out and went through the workouts and went down through the I don't even know what you call it now, boot camp style workout that Andy Papasana Neo, I think is how you say his name. I don't know.
Andy Papa.
He was creating these workouts, and it was the damnedest thing that I've ever seen or done because, remember, I just came from high school. That's not the type of workouts we did. But what did I know? And but ended up earning the rear tire changer position. But remember, back then in 1992, our first race was Atlanta. I always remember because it's Richard Petty's last race. And it was Jeff's first race.
There's a really good book about that race, by the way.
Yes. That was our first race, and I was the rear tire changer. And I'll never forget it. But you're there as a dream, and it's happening just like this. And it all came full circle in about that 8-month period.
Now, were you still living with Bob and Jeff and Andy at the time?
No, that was only short term.
Was that just that one trip?
No, when I came back before I got settled, because I didn't really know the Harrisburg, the Concord area where I was going to be until I settled in. It was only like a few nights, but I'll give you a Jeff Gordon story that probably not everybody knows. So back in the day, Jeff was driving, I believe it was for Bill Davis deal before he actually moved over to the Hendrick deal. So Jeff had this, when I moved into this house, or when I was staying at their house, Jeff had this massive python snake in this cage. I'm petrified of snakes. I mean, I can't, I don't even, not even, let alone a python at this, this, I think is he 20-year-old, 19-year-old kid, 21 maybe at the age. And he's got this python snake.
What was the snake's name?
I don't know.
Please tell me.
I don't know. I don't care because I was petrified of this thing.
You didn't care enough to ask.
No. But I ended up having to stay in the room that this snake was in. And it was like in their bonus room or their extra room type deal. And after the first night, I told him, I said, I can't stay in that room no more. Even though this cage had the big blocks on the top of it and, it was kind of holding down. But, I don't think I slept a wink all night. But the moral of the story was, so Jeff was a Ford driver at the time. And a lot of people will know Stock Car Cafe, which was in there in the Harrisburg area or the Charlotte area. It was a nice restaurant. Everybody in racing kind of went there, hung out, got a deal. So in the middle of the summertime, it was hot. Jeff was in there. This is before I knew Jeff, but I know the story of it because it was related to this snake. And apparently he was in the restaurant and ended up having to head to the airport to do an appearance. Well, when he come out, prior to that, he'd gone to the pet store to get some mice for his snake. Well, when you get rodents or whatever, they put them in little cardboard boxes. 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, remember, we were young, he just threw it in the back seat. Goes in the restaurant. He comes out.
They got out.
They ate through the box. And I don't know, how many people, me being in the car industry now, it's kind of a story like, I could tell you that, it's nasty. Well, he was headed to the airport. He didn't have time to be, he opened up his door, couldn't find them. They weren't in there. Didn't know where they were at. He thought maybe they just got out and gone.
How bad had they tore the car up?
So what happened is he went to the airport, middle of summer, 80, 90, 100 degrees in Charlotte. He comes back, and it's got this awful stink, smell, disgusting grossness to it. Now, by this time, I know Jeff a little bit because I'm working at Hendricks. I kind of been talking to Ray and Andy Popo, a little bit about what's going on there. So I kind of know of Jeff a little bit, although Jeff was still under contract with Bill Davis, so he wasn't around much, although the team was being developed. The mice ate up in the bottom of this Ford Thunderbird of the cushion of the seat, and they nested because it's foam. So they went in there and nested, and that's where they did. But he couldn't find them. They just crawled up underneath the seat, tore it all up, nested in there, and they died in the heat. Took this car back to the dealership and said, "Listen, there's something smelling in this car. I don't know I don't know what's going on in here." Obviously, he was going to tell him that he had mice that got out, and but apparently when they got back to the dealership and they took the seats out and the floorboard and all that, they found these dead mice up in there. So, needless to say, the snake didn't get to eat that week. So, Whatever happened to the snake, I don't know, because I think when he started dating Brooke and they got married, I think the snake had to go away at that point. But I had no part of it.
I picture that as the ultimate. What's that commercial TV? Farmers Insurance or whatever with J.L. Simmons.
I'm not sure.
He said, "You're not going to believe what happened to this car." That would have been a prime candidate.
So that's just a little story of of the beginning days of Jeff Gordon, young, talented, phenomenal kid. Like I said, it's just one little story about mice and a snake that I will never forget till the day I die.
How much did you know, or how much were you aware of Jeff leaving Bill Davis and going to Rick Hendrick? I mean, there was a lot of controversy about that at the time.
At the time, I didn't know anything.
Okay.
I was just a 18-year-old kid that just moved to North Carolina on his own, was getting into racing, was just happy to be there. Didn't even really realize that Rick was starting a new team with the 24 team. Although when I was in the engine shop working, you hear rumblings of, well, take the engine down to the 24 shop or take this part down there to them. And I'm like, well, where's the 24 shop? Well, what is it? What is that? Because I'm thinking the 5, the 25, Ricky Rudd. Actually, it was Terry Labonte then, maybe. Or Ricky or Kenny Schrader.
I think it would have still been,
Ricky. And these are, you go to his complex today, his complex today is not like what it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a little shop up on top of the hill. You go up there and they're drinking, Busch beer and Kodiak tobacco out. It's just Robert G. and, Cecil Gore, all of them up there. It's just the old school. So I didn't even know what the 24 was. And finally, when I caught on, I'm like, yeah, Jeff Gordon. I'm like, who's Jeff Gordon? I didn't have a clue who he was.
Yeah.
I just knew the big names: Darrell Waltrip, Ricky Rudd, Terry Labonte, Kenny Schrader, Dale Earnhardt. That's who I'm thinking this is. I'm not thinking of who Jeff Gordon is.
Yeah.
Don't have a clue. So I don't really know much of all went on, other than as time grew and I became more comfortable in the industry through what media was available then, other than newspaper stuff. You really didn't know. So a lot of that was behind the scenes that I was unaware of, which is fine. I mean, wasn't really my department.
Yeah.
I had a focus to try to earn a spot of being the rear tire changer. But, back then, we had 3 tire changers. Chad Knaus was one, myself, and Mike Trower. And to look at Chad's story today is phenomenal, knowing that him and I worked side by side for a little bit of period of time at the 24 car. He's a phenomenal gentleman. He's earned everything that he's gotten. And I really am proud of, to say one day that him and I worked side by side together.
So the first race that you worked on a pit crew was the 1992 Hooters 500.
Yep.
18
years old. Wondering what the hell am I doing getting ready to jump out in front of one of these 80-mile-an-hour cars coming down pit road.
Can you scoot up the back of your chairs?
Oh, man. What am I getting ready to do and jumping out in front of one of these cars? I've never had to do this before. I was scared to death. But I had to put my fear behind me and know that I was here living my dream. And so that's where it all started. But I was scared to death. I will say that, I wasn't ready for zooming cars coming down pit road. And I think there was a speed limit. It started at that point of some point. It may not be to what they are today. I don't even know how they regulated it. Maybe it was old stopwatches through the timing lines or some crazy, fanatic way they did things. But still, they was pretty aggressive speeds coming down pit road, and I'm getting ready to jump out in front of this thing. but it all worked out.
How long did it take you to get past those butterflies? Or did you ever get past?
Well, maybe after the first stop.
Okay.
This was, again, before the track configuration changed. So we're on the back stretch, was the front stretch at the time. And watching these cars, how fast they're coming off a turn 4 down this straightaway, it blows your mind. It's like, you know, this is your first NASCAR race. This is what you looked forward to. And it was a dream. And I've always grew up around racing, so I was kind of, you know, comfortable around cars and speed and stuff, but not jumping out in front of one or, you know, being on the spotlight of, you know, this NASCAR team. You know, back then TV was TV, but it wasn't like the shows we have today and the spotlights we have everything today. You know, things were different. And, but probably after the first stop, you know, kind of things went, but I think our day ended early, so it wasn't like we were in the race the whole entire time. But it was cool. It was really neat to live back to that day and know that it was one of the greatest racers of all time's last race, and it was our first race.
Yeah.
Not many people can say it was the last and the first.
Yeah.
But all of us on the Hendrick team can say that, especially me, because I was never on another team prior to this. Some people on our team had worked for other teams and had been over the wall and had changed tires and, you know, had been to other races. This was my first race in the big leagues. And so I can say that this was the first and the last.
What was it like working for Ray? Okay,
difficult. Ray was a phenomenal guy. Very knowledgeable, very smart, very intrigued in what he was doing. Had a plan. Sometimes, personally, I didn't agree with the ethics of how things were done. But he was building a program, and he had pressure on him. He had a lot of pressure. Sponsors, this phenom kid driver coming in, Rick Hendrick. There was a lot. And I probably didn't see it that way. So when I transitioned from the engine shop down to the car shop, it was difficult because Randy and that team didn't want me to leave the engine shop to go to the car shop. But I was more of a car guy. I wanted to work on cars. So when I went down there to work, you know, it was long hours, late nights, just something I wasn't used to. And so I had a hard time. And again, my nights became longer because pit crew members also worked in the shop. We didn't have specialized people like we do today, or they do in the sport. So we'd work all day long and then have to go for a 2-hour pit practice. So my day became longer. But Ray is a very successful person. Everything he's done has been great. It just at the time, I wasn't prepared for that.
All right, I'm just going to ask, but you said that you disagreed with the ethics. In what respect?
Very late night working hours. I couldn't plan a home life because we didn't know what time we were going home. He'd work all night long.
Yeah.
I wasn't for that. I was 18, 19 years old. Excuse me. And that was just how he worked. I wasn't ready for that. The people he assembled bought in, but I hadn't bought in yet. I had to find a way to. And, you know, and I did to when I finally got to the point where, like, I want to go home. I want to have a nightlife. I mean, I want to go home and relax. I got to be at work at 7 o'clock every morning. I don't want to work till 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. So that was the hard thing. But that was his ethics of way of working. Like I said, phenomenal person, understood but he had a lot on him that I was not understanding at the time. But if I look back at it today, I'd be a whole lot more supportive and different because I know what it takes.
Right.
Even 5-6 years after I left there, I saw it, like I was starting to learn and understand it better. But, like I said, everything that Ray has done, he's been very successful. He's had a great career. I'm glad to say that my career at the time started early with him. And it's okay. It's just things didn't work out, and I just went a different direction.
All right. How long did you stay with him? Through 1994?
I left at the end of 94.
Okay, all right. I just want to get the timeline down.
Yeah.
That first year, 1993, you go to Daytona. Had you ever been to Daytona before?
Nope. Well, as with my parents.
Okay, yeah.
As a fan.
Right.
Sitting on the side of the fence, trying to get in the pits. How do I get in,
Yeah. He wins the 125.
Yep.
And once he won the 125 and he goes into the Daytona 500 and does really well, finishes third?
Third or fifth, somewhere in there.
Yeah, somewhere in there, third or fourth. At what point did you think that this deal with Jeff, you were on to something? That something pretty special was happening?
It was pretty special to know when we went to Daytona and we win the Gatorade Duel, I think is what it was then. First day. Daytona was Daytona. I think Rockingham was the next race. And then Atlanta back then. Probably about the third or fourth race, it was like, this kid's pretty special. And it took a little bit. Andy Graves was there. He was roommates with Jeff. He knew Jeff growing up. Ray had a relationship from Bill Davis with Jeff. And it took a little bit. But by that third or fourth race, you knew that this kid was pretty special.
So you did go winless in 93. 94, you go to the 600. What do you remember about that night?
Then we won the Brickyard.
Well, you won the Brickyard. You won the 600 first.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then went to the Brickyard after that.
Yeah.
Well, Coca-Cola 600 was, again, a huge event. Nobody ever thought 2 tires would win a race. We come out of there victorious. But it's special as a team to win. But it's really special when, you're the crew chief and the driver. We didn't really have engineers back then. You may have called yourself an engineer, but we weren't engineers. Might have had an engineering degree, but you never put that on your resume when you signed. Because we just didn't know what they were. So that's who really enjoys the celebration. Although you won as a team, but you got to load up and go to the next race. The driver and the crew chief, owner, wife, whatever, they get to really enjoy the accolades of winning after your presentation. The next day, whatever type deal. And so, but it was pretty special the first win, there, the emotion that Jeff had, the excitement that the team had put in, Rick Hendrick's backyard, as they call it. It was pretty special, especially at Charlotte, knowing the history of that place.
Well, speaking of history of a racetrack, you go to the first Brickyard 400, and he wins that. And from that point on, I mean, it was just his career skyrocketed.
Yeah.
I mean, he was, his life was never the same after the Brickyard in particular. Again, what do you remember about that weekend?
Probably about 250,000 people in this massive facility that I've never been into. Watch it on television, Friday morning, first day I've ever stepped foot in Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And the lights, the glamour, the spectacular, everything that went around this event was, just Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the people. It was like a show that never ended. But once the race got started, things kind of calmed back down. And, it was just, you were there to do a job. I was there to do a job, change tires. So that's really your focus all day long because, Ray is the crew chief. He's involved in the fuel mileage and the strategies and, the things that they're going to go on there. I was focused on changing tires that day. I had that job to change tires. And that's kind of like it was every Sunday. Everybody's designated a job. The fuel man, his job is to focus on. You really don't know what goes on during the race much because you get so busy and you get behind the pits and with the pit boxes they have today and all the technology and all the equipment that they're using to measure and take care of all this stuff and the programs, things are a little bit differently. But back then it was all manual. It was all, you had a grain scale or you pulled a scale out of the toolbox that you were using to weigh the cars with, how you weigh dump cans. Today you don't use that. So you really focus on getting the next set of tires up on the wall and getting your gun and your hose all wind up. So that goes by. There's 20 laps that just went by. So you're not really getting to watch much of the race other than, you have big TV screens everywhere. And if something exciting happened, the crowd roared, and you kind of look up and, kind of go with it from there. Or the caution comes out and you're ready to roll again. And so that's your focus. So you really, after about the last pit stop is about all you get to watch of the race. I mean, that's all I kind of really, got to because you were so busy of doing other responsibilities amongst yourself or of whatever the pit crew had to do for the race. So, again, spectacular event to win the inaugural race. It's pretty special.
You were 20 by this time or so?
2021.
Give or take. I know what I would have been like on the road at 20, 21 years old. What was life like for you? And was it difficult to keep yourself in check?
Keep in check, yes. Because I still was young. I still had to have support, meaning make sure that, we didn't get out of line. We didn't do stuff that was going to get us in trouble because we're young. So, we had older people that worked on the team that kind of would help guide us or go out with us or hang out with us or tell you can do this or you can't do that, which was understandable because we were there in the spotlight. It would not take much for the general public to make something out of nothing and, really have a bad turn of events for, some particular person. It's happened in the sport, unfortunately, by some individuals to a certain extent. But we had good guidance. Ray was, at that time, he was a good leader. And, he put a team underneath him to make sure down through the line that we stayed in line. It was the, what do they all call the blowing bubbles and dovetails or something, when you're in school, staying in line type deal. That's kind of what it was like. But you respected that, and that was okay. But you also were traveling the United States. Not everybody gets to do that. And we were, we had perks of when we were traveling and, restaurants and events that we'd go to, whether, times I remember that when I worked at Roush, Jeff Burton took us all to the World Series. It was when it was in Phoenix. So you had situations like that you had to stay in check. And but I think it helped mature me sooner at a younger age, growing forward, and I think I've carried that trend on over time. But yes, you had to stay in line.
Fair enough. So you mentioned that you left Hendrick, the 2014, at the end of '94. What happened?
Well, I always tried to position myself in a better opportunity. And what I mean by that is, you don't want to lateral a move. If you're a tire changer, you don't want to go over just to be a tire changer. Because some people did because you were getting $50 more a week. But I try to progress myself, become a better, because I had one goal in mind by this time. I've been in the industry 3 or 4 years now, and I wanted to be a crew chief. Although I didn't know the pattern that it would take to get to that point, but I knew I had to position myself into good opportunities. And when Robin Pemberton took over Penske with Rusty Wallace, I interviewed over there to become tire changer, mechanic, and help with chassis setups. At the same time, there was a transition that they were going through with Todd and Buddy Parrott and Brad. I think Brad was there at the time too. All the Parrotts were there. But Robin was coming in, and he was starting to build a new team. And so I kind of knew Don Miller and through some connections there, and just kind of positioned myself where I felt I was going to advance myself becoming better. It was a very successful team. Rusty was winning races, I think, in 93, 94. I think they won maybe 10, 12 races or something at that point. So he was, winning races, and that's where I wanted to be part of a winning deal. Do I regret leaving Hendricks? Looking back at it, yes, but I can't change that.
Well, hindsight's always 20/20.
So I just moved forward, and and Jeff went on in '95 to have a great year as well. We had a pretty good year with at Penske and Rusty then, and but I was looking out for myself. I was much happier with myself because we go back to what we talked about earlier. Things just I didn't have a life after work. I did at Penske's. 5:30, 6 o'clock, you were going home. You knew what you were going to be able to plan and go do and have an afterlife. Not that it was partying but you might want to go out on the lake for an hour or so, because we all lived around Lake Norman, or a big softball tournament that all the NASCAR teams were getting ready to have go to, and those are things I couldn't do in the past. It got better as time went on, but I finally was just progressing myself to become a better person, position myself for a better advancement, and I had a life.